My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 29 years old, and 3 Christmases ago, at a dining table covered in red candles and gold plates, my father looked straight at me and said, "You do not live here anymore." He did not raise his voice. He did not slam his fist. He simply said it like a fact, like he was reminding me to pass the salt. That was the moment I understood something I had spent my entire life trying not to see. I was never truly his daughter. I was only his responsibility. And responsibilities can be removed. Before I take you back to that night, I want you to picture this clearly. A large suburban house in Columbus, Ohio, snow falling softly outside, Christmas music playing in the background, a perfect American family scene. At least that is what it looked like from the street. Inside, it was something very different. Growing up, there were 2 children in our house, my older brother, Daniel, and me. Daniel was my father's pride. He played varsity football. He shook hands firmly. He laughed loudly at my father's jokes. My father, Richard Carter, believed in strength, legacy, and obedience. Daniel gave him all three. I gave him questions. I gave him independence. I gave him ideas he did not ask for. I was not rebellious. I was not wild. I graduated at the top of my class. I earned a scholarship to the University of Michigan. I paid my own rent after graduation. I worked as a financial analyst at a respected firm downtown. But I made one mistake in my father's eyes. I chose my own life. 2 years before that Christmas, I declined a job offer at my father's company. Carter Logistics was his empire. He built it from nothing. He expected Daniel to take over operations and me to handle finance. It was the family plan, the safe plan, the obedient plan. I told him I wanted to build something on my own first. I told him I wanted experience outside his shadow. He did not argue that day. He smiled tightly and said, "You will understand one day." That was the first crack. The second crack came when I moved in with my boyfriend, Marcus Hill. Marcus was kind, calm, ambitious. He worked in tech. He treated me with respect I had not always seen at home. My father did not approve. Not because Marcus was irresponsible. Marcus had a solid job and no debt. My father did not approve because Marcus did not ask him for permission. Christmas dinner that year was supposed to be peaceful. My mother, Linda, spent 2 days cooking. The table was set with the china that only came out once a year. Daniel brought his new fiancée. Everyone smiled for photos. Halfway through dinner, my father cleared his throat. The room went quiet. He looked at me, then at Marcus, then back at me. "I hear you have signed a lease together," he said. I nodded. "Yes." He placed his fork down carefully. "Then you have made your choice." I did not understand what he meant. Not yet. "You do not live here anymore," he said. Calm. Final. The room froze. My mother stared at her plate. Daniel said nothing. Marcus squeezed my hand under the table. I felt something inside me shift. Not break. Shift. Because in that moment, I realized this was not about a lease. This was about control. And I was about to do something my father never expected. I did not beg. I did not cry. I simply said, "You are right." And that was when everything truly began. When I said, "You are right," I saw something flicker in my father's eyes. It was not anger. It was surprise. He expected resistance. He expected tears. He expected me to apologize and promise to reconsider. Instead, I picked up my napkin, folded it neatly beside my plate, and stood up from the table. My mother whispered my name, but she did not say anything else. She never did. Silence was her survival strategy. Daniel avoided looking at me. His fiancée stared down at her wine glass as if the reflection inside it was more important than what was happening in front of her. My father leaned back in his chair. "If you walk out now," he said, "do not expect to walk back in." I looked at him directly. "I am not walking out," I replied calmly. "You just told me I do not live here." There are moments in life when you feel fear. And then there are moments when the fear disappears completely because something inside you decides it has had enough. I felt steady, clear, almost peaceful. Marcus stood with me. He did not speak. He did not challenge my father. That was important. This was not his battle. This was mine. I walked upstairs to my childhood bedroom for the last time. The room looked exactly as it had when I left for college. My old trophies were on the shelf. My high school diploma hung on the wall. A photo of me and my father at my graduation sat on the desk. He was smiling in that picture. Proud. Or at least he looked proud. I took the frame and placed it face down. Downstairs, I could hear the faint sound of Christmas music still playing. Silent night. The irony did not escape me. When I came back down with my coat, my father was still seated at the head of the table. He had resumed eating as if nothing had happened. "Actions have consequences," he said without looking at me. "Yes," I replied. "They do." We left the house together. The cold air hit my face, sharp and clean. Snow was still falling, covering the driveway in white. For a second, I looked back at the house. The lights in the windows made it look warm, inviting. But I understood something clearly in that moment. A house can look warm and still feel empty. The next morning, I woke up to 12 missed calls. All from my mother, none from my father. When I finally answered, her voice was trembling. "Your father has removed your access to the trust account," she said quietly. "He says if you want independence, you can have it fully." I almost laughed. The trust fund was something I had barely touched. I paid my own bills. I had savings. But he needed to believe he still had leverage. "There is something else," my mother continued. "He is restructuring the company. He plans to transfer all voting shares to Daniel." That caught my attention. Carter Logistics was worth millions. For years, my father had spoken about dividing leadership equally between Daniel and me. I handled numbers better than anyone in that building. Even my father admitted that privately. But this was not about skill. It was about obedience. I hung up the phone and sat in silence. Marcus watched me carefully. "Are you worried?" he asked. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "I am thinking." Because here was the part my father did not understand. I worked in corporate finance. I analyzed balance sheets every single day. I knew how businesses survive. And more importantly, I knew how they collapse. Carter Logistics had expanded aggressively over the past 3 years. New warehouses, new contracts, heavy loans. Daniel handled operations well, but he was not detail-oriented. He trusted my father completely, and my father trusted his instincts more than data. I did not need revenge. I needed patience. 3 weeks later, Daniel called me for the first time since Christmas. His voice was tight, controlled. "Dad says you have been asking around about the company," he said. "I have friends in the industry," I replied evenly. "Information travels." "You should stay out of this," he warned. I looked at the spreadsheet open on my laptop. Public filings, loan maturities, cash flow projections. I saw what my father did not want to see. "I am already out of it," I said. "Remember?" There was silence on the other end. And that was when I realized something important. My father believed he had removed me from the house. What he did not realize was that he had removed the only person who could save him from what was coming next. By the time January rolled around, the winter winds cut through the city like knives. I was sitting in my apartment, reviewing the quarterly reports for Carter Logistics. Marcus had left for a client meeting, leaving me alone with the quiet hum of my laptop and the soft sound of snow hitting the windows. It was peaceful, almost meditative. But beneath that calm, a storm was building. I traced every transaction from the last year, every loan, every asset, every liability. Something was off, very off. The numbers did not align with the projections Daniel had been showing my father. He had been presenting them as stable, even profitable, but the actual cash flow told a different story. I ran the numbers 3 times. Each time, The pattern was the same: hidden debts, mismanaged shipments, and unreported liabilities. Daniel had no idea what he was doing, or maybe he did, and he was hiding it on purpose. It did not take long to see the larger picture. Carter Logistics was on the brink. The expansion my father had been so proud of? It had been reckless. Every warehouse, every new client, every loan, unbalanced, vulnerable. And with Daniel at the helm, the company could collapse within months. My father had handed over control to the wrong person, and the consequences would fall on him alone. I leaned back in my chair, fingers pressed against my temples. I could call my father immediately, warn him, fix everything. But that would defeat the lesson he had taught me at Christmas. He wanted to control. He wanted obedience. He wanted to feel powerful. Letting him realize the consequences on his own would speak louder than any argument or lecture I could give. I began drafting a plan, not for revenge in the conventional sense, but for exposure. Daniel's mistakes were too glaring to hide. Contracts had errors. Suppliers had sent multiple warnings. Payroll reports were off by hundreds of thousands of dollars. If my father ever reviewed these details, he would see the cracks himself. And I would be there, watching him confront the reality he had ignored for so long. That afternoon, I received an email from the company's internal accounting system. A flag for a missed payment on one of the key supplier accounts. A small error in isolation, but combined with the other overlooked details, it painted a clear picture of mismanagement. I printed the reports, highlighted the discrepancies, and put them in a folder labeled Annual Review, Critical Issues. That evening, I went to my father's office. I rang the bell, and a familiar security guard let me in, eyebrows raised. My father sat behind his massive oak desk, looking over a stack of papers, glasses perched low on his nose. He did not notice me at first. "I have something you need to see," I said, placing the folder on his desk. His eyes finally lifted, and I could see the flicker of recognition, hesitation, curiosity, something that looked almost like fear. "Is this necessary?" he asked cautiously. "Absolutely," I replied. "You made a choice at Christmas. Now you will see the consequences of that choice." He opened the folder slowly, scanning the reports. At first, he frowned. Then his expression shifted. Confusion, disbelief, anger, panic. He could not reconcile what he thought he knew with the reality in front of him. "This cannot be," he muttered. "Daniel would have handled this." I shook my head gently. "Daniel is not ready to handle this. And you thought removing me would protect the company and yourself? It did the opposite." He looked up at me, eyes wide. You did not warn me?" "I did not need to," I said calmly. "You needed to see for yourself. You wanted control, and now you have it. Every decision, every oversight, every missed warning, yours to deal with." He sat back, pale, silent. The weight of the Christmas words I had heard, the ones he had thrown at me, had come back to him in a way he could not undo. And in that moment, I realized that power was not in the house, or in the trust fund, or even in Daniel. It was in understanding, seeing clearly, and waiting. I left the office without another word. The snow had stopped outside, and the city lights reflected off the icy streets. I knew what would happen next. My father would scramble, Daniel would panic, and the cracks would widen. But I would remain untouched. I had not sought revenge. I had simply allowed truth and time to do what neither anger nor confrontation ever could, and for the first time in years, I felt completely free. By February, the tension at Carter Logistics had reached a fever pitch. My father was frantically calling board members, requesting urgent meetings and demanding explanations from Daniel, who, of course, had no answers that made sense. Every mismanaged shipment, every missed payment, every hidden debt I had uncovered was now laid bare, and the panic was palpable. It was almost beautiful in a calculated sort of way. Daniel had started showing cracks. He was defensive in meetings, dismissive to staff, and increasingly erratic. Emails that once carried a tone of authority now trembled with uncertainty. I kept a close eye on him, knowing that each misstep would bring the inevitable exposure closer. The staff, too, began whispering, noticing inconsistencies and the rising tension between management. Rumors started to swirl, quietly at first, then louder. One afternoon, I received a call from the head of operations, a normally stoic man named Harold. "We need to talk," he said, voice low. I met him at a coffee shop near the office. He slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were copies of supplier complaints, unpaid invoices, and internal memos highlighting Daniel's repeated errors. "I didn't want to get involved," he said, "but these things, they can't be ignored anymore. Someone has to take control." I nodded slowly, realizing just how far Daniel had fallen. The pieces were aligning exactly as I had planned, not out of malice, but from careful observation and timing. My father would face the reality, Daniel would crumble, and the company's true potential could finally be restored. That evening, I returned home and drafted a strategic email to the board, outlining the financial discrepancies, the operational failures, and the urgent need for intervention. I sent it with a careful hand, making sure every point was factual, undeniable, and irrefutable. There was no room for argument, only truth. By the next morning, the board had convened an emergency meeting. My father arrived, visibly shaken, but determined. Daniel was present too, sweating and defensive. I sat silently at the edge of the room, observing. As the discussion unfolded, each error, each mismanagement point, each neglected warning I had compiled was presented. The tension was thick, suffocating. Daniel stumbled over his words, tried to justify his failures, but the evidence was overwhelming. Finally, my father turned to me, eyes wide and almost fearful. "You orchestrated all of this?" he asked, voice trembling. "I observed," I replied evenly. "I documented. I allowed the truth to speak for itself. That is all." The board made a unanimous decision. Daniel would be removed immediately, and a restructuring plan would begin under my guidance. My father, humbled and chastened, could only nod in reluctant agreement. The room felt like a courtroom, and the verdict had been delivered, not by anger, not by confrontation, but by careful patience, observation, and undeniable truth. Walking out of the office that day, I felt the weight of months lift from my shoulders. Control had never been about authority, money, or position. It had been about clarity, timing, and the courage to let reality unfold on its own. Daniel's downfall, my father's reckoning, and the company's chance at redemption were all part of a chain reaction I had merely guided, never forced. And in that quiet, victorious moment, I realized something even more profound. Revenge is often overrated. True power lies not in retaliation, but in patience, foresight, and letting truth illuminate the path that others refuse to see. The snow had finally melted, leaving the city streets wet and glistening in the afternoon sun. And as I walked home, I knew one undeniable fact. I had not only survived the storm, I had mastered it.